Good day, everyone. This is Chapter 5, Managing the IT Function, and I'm going to show to you the first part of Chapter 5, which is to be discussed by Miss April Rose Bungcag. So I will be seen here on the video because I will be, of course, at least guiding the discussions, or if there's something that I would like to add to, then I'm going to give or provide some inputs. You cannot see April Rose here on the respective video, because she has problems about it. So we will just be hearing the audio version of her voice. Then you will notice later on that the presentation is actually just a matter of some highlighted terms, and then there are certain items perhaps which are not shown. So that's why please expect that I'm going to show to you other sets of slides. All right. Now, managing or management is really a long topic or chapter, on the sense that there are phases or functions in management. So although we have used the word function in IT sense, however, we can also connect the management functions, which are basically having the acronyms of POSDC. And these are planning, organizing, staffing, directing, and controlling. I understand that some books would have 4, wherein staffing is not there, so the acronym is PODC, so without the S. However, with sources being abound about management, it seems that more are saying that there's actually the S. So that's why we are going to use POSDC in our discussions. In addition, directing, or the D there in the POSDC, of course, also is another term or synonymous to the term leading. So leading is the same as directing, because when we lead or direct, we are going to guide our people, our resources towards the fulfillment of the objectives. So that's basically the point of that. In addition, this book also incorporates our financial aspect, which is the F, financing or funding. So that is also tackled here. And that's why our PODC that later on turned into POSDC will still expound into POFSDC. All right, so those are the functions in the management which are now connected to the IT function. So these are the sub-functions then of the IT function, or the phases or the steps. So hopefully that is enough for the introduction. And also to highlight that actually we can just have one word for organizing, and then everything, the resources involved in the management will be incorporated there. However, the authors wanted to really highlight the organization of the finances or the sources of capitalization for the business. So that is what funding or financing is all about. In addition, for the human resources, we have the staffing. All right, so let us begin with the presentation. Mind you guys that I'm going to pause once in a while should there be a need to go to the slides to be able to give some inputs. All right, let's begin.
Hello everyone, this is April Rose Bungcag speaking. I am going to discuss about the managing the IT function. So what is an IT function? Basically, what does an IT department do in an organization? So a company's information technology department must plans, supports, operates the organization's IT infrastructure, which enables business users to carry out their roles efficiently, productively, and securely. They must also fulfill the multiple business and technical requirements by providing a secure and reliable IT infrastructure and minimizing costs. So there are some mismanagement of the IT functions that could result in a serious risk. such as the risk associated with ensuring the availability, security, integrity, and maintainability of computing infrastructure, and also the reliability of the company's information. By this means, the IT auditor must ensure that the IT managers are properly managing the IT function of the organization in ensuring that the IT functions will add value to the company. So the next topic, organizing the IT functions. So this includes developing a structure for the people, positions, departments, and activities within the IT function. IT functions. So the main point here is is the proper segregation of incompatible functions within the organizations or within the IT department. So these incompatible duties are include authorizing transactions, recording transactions, and also maintaining custody of assets. So why is there a need to organize the IT functions and proper segregate these so-called incompatible duties? So the answer is simple. It is to avoid fraudulent activity. So improper segregation of incompatible function can threaten the integrity and security of the organization's information. So as well as also the computing infrastructure. So for example, an employee handling or assigned to authorize and record transactions. It is possible that such employee will authorize and record seemingly valid accounting transactions while altering results to achieve fraudulent objectives. So therefore, the IT auditor should ensure that segregation of incompatible duties are enforced, and also they must ensure that the control over application and data are integrated into the system development and computer operations. And in financing the IT functions.
Okay, for a while. So let's have first the organizing the IT function first before we will go to financing. So I'm going to go now or present 2 slides for us to be able to add more content to the discussions because April Rose did not present any slides. So let us check it. Anyway, organizing basically is going to be, as what I've said, the resources of the business are being placed, being deployed, being incorporated and integrated to the processes to be able to produce or achieve the desired outputs and to fulfill the goals and objectives of the organization from vision, mission, goals, objectives, strategies, and policies. So the IT function must be properly organized and structured in such a way that being a department should be separate from all other departments having incompatible functions. Otherwise, as said by April Rose, it would be easier to perpetrate or commit fraud. Then IT manager must define the role and articulate the value of the IT function. What would be its responsibility, its accountability to the organization, and what really are the values. Articulate is really to lay down, to specify the value of the IT function. Then configuration as to the IT function would depend to factors both externally and internally. And the internal controls which would mitigate or minimize or mitigate the risks involved. So the sound internal controls are essential to the structural framework. All right. Then locating the IT function. To whom should the IT manager report? So normally the IT manager should be reporting to a superior or supervisor. So that's why it is very important to have a clear organizational chart so that you would be able to really see and trace and evaluate to whom should the IT manager report. However, normally our basis would be that it should be to a person of a higher level. Then what are the complexities or ramifications on the IT managers? The ability to acquire needed resources and to prioritize workloads, especially during times that there would be pressures or there would be concerns about certain parts of IT. Then how about the location of the function? Again, we have to segregate incompatible duties. So in auditing theory books, there are actually 4 of them. But I understand that it's like 3 since some books really have 3. So we have authorization, recording, and custody. However, auditing theory books would really suggest CARE. The acronym is CARE. In addition to the 3, which are actually for the first 3 letters or characters of the acronym CARE, so we have custody, authorization, and recording. Actually, there is also execution. So what's the difference of the 3 or the 4 then? I will start with custody. Custody is having the possession of the goods and the authority over them, if not physical possession. So we can really ask and we can really have the responsibility of this person in relation to keeping or safeguarding the assets of the organization. If we say authorization, this is the person or these are the persons who are in charge with the approval of certain requests in terms of whatever functions in the organizations, most especially in IT, because it's IT like acquisition of IT resources. So who will approve? This is the person, perhaps the head of the IT department. And also in relation to the purchasing department, before the purchasing department will purchase the said requested assets, then it should ensure that there is a signature coming from the head of the requesting party. Then another one is recording. Recording is, of course, in the accounting department who will journalize the transactions, who will put in the books of accounts so that they will be processed together in the accounting cycle or process or processes. Then if you see execution, if you say the acquisition of the resources, who would really actually do it, the acquisition? So the purchasing department, all right, or whoever is the purchasing staff. So those functions should be separated and segregated. Otherwise, it will be easier for certain fraudsters. We call them the fraudsters who are the perpetrators of fraud. All right. So can be accomplished with judicious, meaning careful choices, meaning well thought choices with respect to placing the IT function in the organization and integrating or combining the program controls into computing infrastructures and applications. Then, should the IT manager report to the accounting manager? We would say in terms of accounting transactions, so there would be some parts of it, but it's not like the IT manager is really, as a whole, very accountable to the accounting manager because they are again having separate functions. So the accounting manager should be separate from the IT manager and vice versa. So that's a good idea. What's the bad idea? Most controllers perform 2 of the 3 incompatible duties. So this would make 3 of the 3. So what is meant by here is that the accounting manager perhaps could be doing out of the, let me go back, 3 here, authorization, recording, custody. So accountant might be doing the 2, or the controller, the head of the accounting department or the finance department. So if you are going to allow the reporting of the IT manager to accounting, so this might result to collusion or connivance, meaning agreement of people from different departments to commit or to have fraud or to do fraud. And actually, it is much easier to detect. In fact, it's here difficult to detect fraud if ever there would be 2 or more employees involved, and most especially if they are from various or different departments. All right? Then should IT manager report to another operations or administrative manager? The good thing is that, or the good idea here is that many software applications deal with these areas. So the IT managers could be having the software applications that they know of, and they are also used in the operations or admin. What's the bad idea? Again, in the separation or segregation of incompatible duties, it's going to be very challenging if, for example, they will have like two of the three, or in fact, the three of them, if possible. Then other managers would not likely have the expertise to guide and support an IT manager. That's true. Managers would likely give priority to their own IT needs and less to the rest of the company. So self-interest could abound, most especially that it will be easier for them to circumvent things in the company. And then the IT function may not have access to upper management for influencing decisions about placing priorities and setting strategies. So if we are going to let the IT manager report to another manager, so the IT manager might have difficulty of stressing out their concerns. So that's why they should be of having same levels in terms of the managers. I hope that is, of course, clear. Then what about alongside another line managers? Good idea. It means that the IT manager having the same footing can also point out their, let's say, concerns or issues or priorities to the company. And then this means that all of the managers will be reporting to the CEO. So they're of the same footing. CEO has responsibility, I mean, over, but rarely performs the three incompatible duties. That's true because the CEO normally is going to have like the summarized version of all things happening from various departments. Then with sound internal controls, this can be effectively managed. So of course, internal controls should be there, which should be sound and strong in order for us to be able to achieve the four objectives, remember, that we have from the COSO framework. So effectiveness and efficiency of operations, fairness and reliability of financial reporting, compliance with applicable laws and regulations, and safeguarding of assets. So don't forget the four, guys. Then what about should IT manager report above another line managers? So in a VP position, the IT manager can, of course, coordinate strategies, that standards, establish priorities across the entire organization. So let's just say there's a VP, the VP IT, the VP Finance, which is the normal setup. VP Operations, we have, let's say, the VP for purchasing and the other functional departments. This structure allows the IT managers who report to the vice president to focus on local issues and needs. So this is going to be okay though, but then in terms of like the IT managers having the same level as the others would be fine or okay. So this is an example in which for the VPs, well, the VPs that I've talked a while ago, those are the VPs having the functional departments consideration. But this one, this is really true. So it's okay that the IT manager is going to report to the VPs because the VPs here really are on the different operations on different geographical regions. Plus, there's really a VP for IT. So if the VP for IT will report to the CEO, IT manager could be okay reporting to them. So that's okay because it's not like the manager reporting to the other managers also. So I hope that is clear. Then here is our presentation about the interlink and the cross-link of the goals, whether short-term and long-term, to factors, different factors. So we have the profit, we have the growth, control, and opportunity. So if we place good control, that would have impact for us to be able to seize opportunity. And if we seize the opportunity, we will be able to grow and we earn in the process, and it's a cycle, right? So designing the IT function is determined by a lot of forces, could be cultural, political, and economic, which is innate or inherent or within the organization, or it could be outside, but it's with the nature of the organization. Then these are the considerations within an IT function. We have to separate, again, those incompatible tasks, duties, and responsibilities, tasks, I mean. development, operations, and security. So development normally is on the execution, operations also, but well, operations really is more on the execution now. Security, well, they are more on the executions again, but on different areas or fields. Development, operations, and security. In terms of the development, so they are the ones, the staff here would actually do the following things. So we have operating systems, business applications, and other key software access. So that's why we have to be careful about this one, because if we merged with operations and security, well, it's so easy for these developers to commit fraud because they can just place, for example, this is not like say bad things about them, but they can place like a bug there, which will perhaps do some anomalies later on, like a time bomb or bug. Anyhow, system developers are authorized to create and alter software logic. Therefore, they should not be allowed to process information. Otherwise, again, if they are now going to handle the live data, so they can manipulate the software so that it would produce also manipulated information. Then, of course, they should not also maintain the custody. So this is like another function which is incompatible to development. Then operations clearly should not be involved with the development and the custody. So entering data now, we now place information to the systems. So authorizing transactions. If you are from the accounting department, you process the information accounting-wise, so that's recording. And then disseminating output is maintaining custody. So this is where, for example, we are now going to keep the outputs or file them or stack them. All right. Then computer security is for the safekeeping of the resources and also for the protection. That's very important, whether logical or physical. So I've mentioned that in certain discussions like in chapter 3, so make sure to recall logical and physical or versus. Anyway, we will be mentioning that again in the chapter, or this chapter 5. Ensuring that business software applications are secure, that's true. And then safety, so we have to maintain the confidentiality and privacy of our corporate information, the networks, and the physical facilities. Take note that the analysts and programmers should not have access to the production library, wherein we now have here the confidential information, which are coming from the operations, so processed information and reports. Then this is an example of an IT function manager having people reporting to him or her doing certain functions, which are, of course, to be segregated because they're incompatible. The development, again, operations, computer-wise, security, and the user services or the actual users themselves. All right. Then IT auditors also would play a very important role in the IT function because they are going to examine like how effective and efficient those processes, IT to be exact, or to be more specific, after such processes have taken place. So they ensure that systems developers and computer operators are segregated. This is one thing to check by IT auditors. And also IT function should form a separate security specialization to maintain custody of software applications and corporate data. All right, so that's a suggestion and advice, though, for security aspect. So separate from the other functions. Anyhow, also IT auditors will be in separate functional department like the IT audit department because they are doing also jobs or tasks which are to be separate from the other functions. Okay, so this is now the another part, funding. So let's go back to April Rose for the continuation.
It is critically important that the IT functions must be adequately funded, or else it will unable to conduct day-to-day operations and fulfill strategic objectives. For an IT functions to do its tasks as intended, the organization should always have enough budget to fund whatever the IT department needs that is beneficial to growth of the company or the organizations. So in funding in the IT function, funding, there are two funding approaches, which is
Okay,
the
for a while. So funding is same as financing, by the way. They can be used interchangeably in our discussions and in the usage in IT context.
profit and the cost center approach. So when we say cost center approach, it is when the IT manager prepares budget and submit it to the upper management and justify the request for the operating funds. Typically, budget requests for human resource, materials, and supplies and overhead. While in profit center approach, they submit um, detailed budget to the upper management. And the charge internal users for IT services, creating intra-company funding for of the IT functions based on the usage. So the next concern facing of the IT manager is the staffing.
All right. So that was it for financing as discussed by April Rose. So allow me to show to you again the PowerPoint presentation. All right. So as said by her, there are approaches actually by funding or financing. If you say funding or financing, we're looking for sources of capitalization for the IT. So where are we going to get the money to finance or fund the function? Well, to begin, it must be that the IT function adequately funded to fulfill strategic objectives. So, well, if we have certain goals and objectives that we want to achieve, we must have the funds, and the sources could be abound, but sometimes the resources could be difficult to get. So example, if we borrow money from banks, we need, of course, the audited financial statements first to process along with other things. Then we also have, for example, if we issue shares, we need to go to Securities and Exchange Commission for the approval and many things. So anyway, to continue, business risk of underfunding. Business risk, by the way, is the inability of the organization to fulfill or attain or achieve its objectives. So do not forget that, because this is really used like in the entire course. Then if we are underfunded, so we will not be able to fulfill the needs and demands of our stakeholders, customers, vendors, and employees, and others. Because where will we get the funds if they have certain needs that they wanted to, of course, attained by themselves from us? So how can we do such? Then such can adversely impact the success of the company. So if we do not respond to the needs and demands of our kings, our stakeholders, and others, then expect that we do not achieve our objectives, so no success indicator, and such would result to lesser profits if appropriate, or even no profits at all. Then for, of course, certain areas, but overall could be lesser profits. Audit risk of underfunding. So audit risk is that the audit cannot really detect the material misstatements out of our, for example, financial statements and financial statements audit, or if this is internal or IT audit, so cannot detect the material misstatements, or let's say errors and fraud, materially speaking, arising from our operations. And also, which means that the audit risk is that the audit cannot detect the ineffectiveness and efficiency, by the way, so not efficient, of our operations. Could be sometimes not highlighted, ineffectiveness and inefficiency of operations. So heavy workloads can lead to a culture of working around the system of internal controls. If people have a lot of things to be done, then they're already so much loaded, they're already pressured very much, so they might not focus on the quality they're going to be working around, so doing certain things to have shortcuts just to be able to hit the targets or quotas. So these are also other things that we have to take note. Well, heavy workloads, I'm talking about perhaps there are like lesser employees in the sense that we cannot really pay for their compensation and benefits and all because we don't have the necessary capitalization and finances and sources of funds to be able to pay the necessary expenses. So that's what I meant when I said there could be other things also, but the point is that they would result later on to audit risk, ineffectiveness, and inefficiency of operations. Then there are two approaches, the cost center, which we mean that the IT department or the IT function should be treated just like a cost center in responsibility accounting, wherein it only incurs costs. So it just submits detailed budget to upper management involving, for example, certain costs only and to justify the item and then use the IT function scorecard approach, which is based on the balanced scorecard by Kaplan and Norton. So looking into the four things though, or then. So this is just like having the budget and incurrence of cost, and that's it, for as long as they're justified. Then another one is profit center approach, which means that the IT as a department can earn in the process aside from having the budget for the cost. So they are financed by the organization on that level, and they can also incur their costs coming from the revenues. So there could be charging of the internal users for services through intra-company billing. But what is going to happen, especially for the negative one, is that it might result for the IT department to build or to bill the other departments or those who are needing the services of the IT department to have excessive billings or excessive billing rates until the rates exceed costs of outside providers. So of course, this can be remedied if this is going to happen, like IT departments can really charge. So we must have a comparison and a study and also, let's just say, benchmarking of the rates from the outside providers versus of the insiders so that we would not go beyond with what's offered from the outsiders. The positive income though or outcome by this is that managers will not overly demand IT services or will not be overly demanding of IT services because they will be charged nevertheless, and such would be part of their report, like how much did IT charge for your services? And for example, you're exceeding already the budget or budgeted values of cost. So you need to explain, especially as managers, and then the situations already are beyond the relevant range. So remember in management by exception in management accounting that if there's a range, let's say from 10% to 30%, and you went below or above that, then that's going to be management by exception, wherein the managers will have to report then the rank and file employees to the upper management. So just a connection of the topics. Then billing rates. So as said, there should be, this is the suggestion that I've said a while ago, that the independent party should be comparing rates to outside services. So this basically means that there's really an independent sort of committee in the organization that would really be comparing the rates imposed by the IT department with such from the outsiders in order to make sure again that the IT department does not impose rates that are way excessive, let's just say, or even excessive. All right. Then IT auditors should, on our ends now as IT auditors, confirm that reasonableness check is performed at least annually to ensure that billing rates are not excessive. Very right. So that's part of the job of the IT, to ensure again there is effectiveness and efficiency of operations, and also to detect if there would be any fraudulent transactions or actions and possibilities of fraud to happen. Okay, then in acquiring IT resources, we all know these, especially if we are able to meet already or to tackle capital budgeting, that the approach is, of course, the net benefit, which is called also as the net present value. And this is the difference between the present value of the cash flows or of the benefits minus the costs that are involved. So the result is NPV, meaning the highest NPV would be prioritized just in case we have limited capitalization. In addition, for this one, which is, of course, quantitative, there is also a qualitative approach in which we're going to use a scorecard approach, especially the balanced scorecard for the non-quantifiable items. Because I understand that there's one area there talking about the finances, so financial perspective, that's going, of course, to involve NPV. So for the other items there, which are focused with the non-quantifiable or the non-quantitative ones, meaning the qualitative factors. All right. Then this is an example of the scorecard approach or the IT function scorecard to justify the in-house development of web-based customer rather ordering systems. So we have here the scorecard and the actions involved. So example for the items operational performance. So we now talk about the increased sales and faster speed. For user satisfaction, so we have the surveys revealing that they are approving and they received well the said web-based customer ordering system. Adaptability and scalability, so the web-based ordering can increase sales, and there's the forecast, and we can integrate that to our accounting and inventory system so that when customers would order, then our inventories are available. We can check also if such is available or are available on time, as well as the accounting recording could be real time or could be faster if not real time. If you say real time, by the way, as soon as transactions would happen or orders would happen, they're of course processed also in the same way or manner or time frame, if not necessarily like same time. Then organizational contribution, well, this is the one that I'm talking a while ago, or I was actually talking a while ago, that organizational contribution will involve the NPV analysis. So the net present value, which is the difference between the present value of the cash flows less the cost of investment. And this would estimate the financial costs and benefits. By this particular instance, this could be financial, while the other three might involve quantitative and qualitative. So quantitative items which are not necessarily financial, because really this one would really be in terms of pesos or dollars for US, but the first three would really be involving other numbers which are not money, so non-financial items, non-financial quantitative items, and the others would be qualitative items. So more on the qualitative though for the first three. All right, so that's it for the organizing the IT function and also the financing or funding the IT function. The first two functions right after planning. So remember, planning the IT function has already been tackled exhaustively in chapter 4. And in this chapter 5, we are now continuing the other functions: organizing, staffing, directing, or leading, and controlling. So for the first part, we discussed the organizing and funding or financing, while staffing will be in the next part of this video series. All right, so hopefully you've learned something from this session, and I'll see you next time for another learning session. Bye for now. Thank you and God bless.